The Boys last season was some of the most greatest must-see TV I've watched in a long time, and though some online fans cried about Homelander's end, spoilers by the way, at least it's not the comic version where he destroys himself with the clone and a crazy twist. But further into the show than Homelander, some extremely dark themes link directly to your life and what you're watching on screen. And I know, you watch this show to probably get away from your real life, but it's super important that you know what's coming. I'm Purple America, and this is The Boys Season 4 Hidden Parallel Analysis. Every character in The Boys finale is a spiritual archetype. They're not just characters, they're roles in a cosmic drama. And if you understand what each one represents biblically, you'll see the entire show isn't entertainment. It's a revelation of how the beast system actually works through different kinds of people. The tyrants, the compromised elite, the false prophets, the broken rebels, and the generations caught in between. I'll go through part 1, the characters, understanding who they are spiritually and what they represent in the real world, and why the show chose these exact archetypes to tell the end-time story. And this, I don't feel is fiction, this is a blueprint of the roles people play in the rise of the Antichrist. Homelander is the fusion of institutional power and godliness. He represents the rise of authoritarian nationalism, specifically what a Republican-style strongman would look like if he was completely unapologetic about his power and completely open about the rejection of God. He combines political legitimacy with raw, unapologetic dominance, and he doesn't hide behind committees or corporate structures. He is the power. And he makes it clear, there is no God, just only him, only his will, and only his order. And we can see this very clear in Season 4 when he's plastered all over the walls of everything. This is exactly what 2 Thessalonians 2, 3-4 describes. Homelander doesn't just rule, he demands worship. He doesn't just have power, he has the appearance of legitimacy. And he's not some cartoonish villain, he's sympathetic in his backstory. He was created to be enslaved, and he rebelled. He seems justified in his dominance. That's not the deception, that's how the real Antichrist will probably work. The show makes it clear, Homelander didn't come from nothing, he was created, engineered, designed. And that matters because Revelation 13 talks about the beast rising from the abyss as something constructed, something artificial, and something made by human hands but animated by demonic power. Homelander is the American Antichrist. He's nationalism without God, strength without righteousness, and power without mercy. And he's a blueprint that the system has been building towards all along. But Homelander didn't rise alone. He was created, built, designed. By who? Well, by Vought, by Stan Edgar and the corporate technocratic elite. These are the shadow powers, the people behind the curtain, the ones who serve whichever political regime is in power as long as their wealth and control remain intact. They don't care about Republicans or Democrats. They care about maintaining their dominance through whichever system is currently in place. Stan Edgar represents the cold, calculating corporate oligarchy, the shareholders, the board members, the people who think money and technology give them absolute control. They created Homelander as a product, a tool, something to maintain their power. But here's the demonic part. They can't control what they've created. Revelation 17 describes this perfectly. The corporate powers give their authority to the beast. In the show we see this play out. Stan Edgar and Vought built the system. They built the technology. They built the infrastructure, they built Homelander, and then Homelander turns on them. He uses their own machine to consolidate his power. He doesn't need them anymore, he is the system now. This is the paradox of trying to build power without God. You can engineer systems, you can consolidate wealth, you can create technological control structures, but you can't control the ambition that will eventually rise to use the system against you. Vought represents the true architects of the beast system. Not the tyrant, the people who built the scaffolding for the tyrant to climb. And they represent a spiritual principle. When you serve power instead of God, you create something that will eventually consume you. Now we get to one of the most spiritually dangerous characters, Firecracker. She's the apostate church, the false prophets, the Christian influencer who sold her faith for fame and political power. She takes Christianity and weaponizes it. She uses the language of faith, the aesthetics of revival, and the symbols of the church, but she's leading people directly to worship the beast. She merges Christianity with American nationalism and Homelander nationalism. She makes Homelander worship seem like patriotic faith, like you're voting for God when you're actually voting for the Antichrist. This is the great falling away described in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3. The church doesn't oppose the beast. The church becomes the propaganda machine for the beast. And here's what makes Firecracker so demonic. She's not a hypocrite in the traditional sense. She actually believes what she's saying sometimes. She's convinced herself that aligning the church with authoritarian power is what Jesus would do. She's rebranded apostasy as revival. She's repackaged the worship of the beast as the worship of God. In the show, we see her having a moment where she's able to have clarity and maybe even change, but she never did. When she was pressured, she then went directly to that Antichrist system. She represents every Christian influencer who uses their platform to push nationalism as Christianity. Every evangelical who says that supporting strongman politics is God's will. Every megachurch pastor who tells his congregation that wealth and power are signs of God's favor. Each person who knows they're compromised but has too much at stake to admit it. The scariest part, she's probably more dangerous than Homelander, because Homelander is obviously evil. At a certain point, he admits he's evil and puts it on national television. He declares himself as God and demands worship. But Firecracker wraps evil in the language of faith. She corrupts the very thing that's supposed to oppose the beast, the church itself. Firecracker is Satan masquerading as an angel of light. And millions will follow her straight into the beast system thinking they're just following Jesus. Starlight is more subtle than Firecracker, but she might be more dangerous in a different way. She's the false light, the controlled opposition, the Democratic Party's published face that claims to fight for justice while being deeply compromised. She wears a cross, literally and symbolically. She has the right words: justice, equality, acceptance, love. She positioned herself as the hero fighting against Homelander and the evil system, and she makes it look like resistance is possible, like reform from within is actually real. But she's completely owned by the machine. She makes deals with Vought in the very beginning. She allies with the very system she claims to oppose, and she knows the truth but stays for power and relevance. This represents the entire progressive and democratic establishment. The politicians and influencers who say all the right things but ultimately serve the same corporate structure, who promise change but deliver managed decline, who use language of justice as cover for complicity. The genius of her character is that she's not lying when she says she wants justice. She does, but she wants justice within the system. She wants to be a good person within the beast system, and the fundamental compromise makes her a tool of the beast even when she's fighting it. She represents those who see the system is corrupt but stay in it because the alternative seems worse, who knows they're compromised but rationalize it as necessary, who become part of the machine while telling themselves they're fighting it. Sister Sage is one of the most spiritually important characters because she represents something specific: brilliant people who see the truth and choose evil anyway. She's the smartest person in the room. She has the intellect, the strategic mind, and the ability to understand the entire system and move pieces. And she uses every bit of that intelligence to serve the beast. She's not coerced. She's not fooled. She chooses it. She orchestrates the purification of the system. She removes obstacles. She clears the old guard. And she does the behind-the-scenes work that enables Homelander to take total power. She's the architect of the consolidation. This connects in what I discuss about Canaanite spirituality. The Canaanites were intelligent. They used God-given intellect to invert God's order. Sister Sage represents modern intellectuals, brilliant people in tech, academia, government, and finance who understand how the system works and chooses to perfect it rather than oppose it. She's particularly dangerous because she represents the corruption of Black excellence in a way. She's a brilliant Black woman not using her gifts for liberation, but for enslavement. She's not a victim of the system, she's a priest of it. She sees what's happening and participates enthusiastically. That's worse than ignorance. That's defiant knowledge serving evil. That's using God's given gifts to build the beast system under Homelander. Butcher is the character who wakes up to the system's deception but responds with rage instead of God. He saw the corruption, he understood the evil, and he wanted out. But he wanted a normal life, a family, and peace. But the system wouldn't let him have that. The system destroyed his life, so he chose to destroy it back. He represents people who see through the lie, who reject the mainstream narrative, who understand the system is evil, but instead of turning to God, they turn to vengeance. They become the monster they're fighting, and that demonic behavior is seen through him taking Compound V. By the end of his arc, Butcher isn't fighting the beast system, he is the beast system. He's become the thing he hated. He's using the same power, the same violence, the same demonic force, just aimed at a different target. And so here's spoilers for the whole season if you haven't watched it already. At the very end, he gets ready to kill all supers and actually almost kill himself. And I think that is perfect in understanding that he became the system and now he wants to get rid of it because he's part of it. This is the tragedy of resistance without God. You can wake up to the deception, you can see through the lies, you can understand the system is evil, but if you don't align with God's truth instead of just opposing the system's lies, you become what you're fighting. Butcher represents the anarchist, the conspiracy theorist, the person who wakes up and then turns to violence instead of God. He's important because he shows what happens when you fight evil without Christ. You don't defeat evil, you become it. The show includes several other characters who represent different kinds of spiritual compromise and correction. Huey is the everyman, the lukewarm Christian, the soft liberal who supports progressive causes not out of genuine conviction, but because he wants to be seen as kind. He knows the system is corrupt, but overlooks it because they're not as bad as the other side. He becomes complicit through rationalization. The Deep represents fake masculine strength, the conservative influencer selling toxic dominance wrapped in confidence. He's not actually strong, he's fragile. He's a predator pretending to be powerful. When he loses his position, he has nothing because his entire identity was built on false dominance. A-Train represents the black community being used as a political prop by both sides. He's vulnerable when he's useful, disposable when he's not. Both the Republican system and the Democratic resistance use black bodies as capital and then discard them. Ashley Barrett is a terrified corporate slave. She knows the system is evil, she's seen behind the curtain, but she's too afraid to leave, and she's owned by the machine through fear and ambition. And Ryan is the next generation, the child with immense power being pulled between a destruction and continuation of the cycle. He could break the system and become the next iteration of it, but it's all up to his choice. And these characters all, in my honest opinion, represent diversity and inclusion within different ethnicities in the United States of America. They all go through their significant challenges, and some of them actually join the soups, right? And some of them understand that they are soups. And one thing that's very interesting is Kamiko as the Asian character having powers when Frenchie and MM don't. Now, I don't want to make any too broad of speculations here, but the thing that I can say is very interesting how they chose the Asian American character to have somewhat power to be able to go in and fight other characters. So, in my honest opinion, this is representative of the Asian culture and how they have immense power within the United States culture. They can go to school, they have good money, and most of the time they exceed in the system that then in turn affects their life. Well, while characters like MM still have to struggle and do things that they don't want to do, and characters like Frenchie still live a life that they would be living in another country. All of these characters represent different spiritual states, different kinds of compromise, and different ways people align themselves with or against the beast system. So now that we know every character in The Boys is playing a role in the rise of the Antichrist, the tyrant who demands worship, the shadow elite building the infrastructure, the false prophet who corrupts the church, and the controlled opposition who manages resistance, understanding these archetypes means understanding how the real system works. The beast doesn't rise through one person, it rises through all of these roles working together, each playing their part. In your life and in your community and in your church, where do you see these archetypes show up? Where is the false prophet? Where is the controlled opposition? Where is the corrupted intellect? And where is the broken avenger? And most importantly, what archetype are you playing? But characters don't exist in a vacuum. They're moving through a sequence, a timeline, a progression of events that leads from chaos to control. The show follows a specific pattern, and I believe it's a biblical pattern. Now, there's these 8 events that I came up with from the book of Revelation and the minor prophets, arranged in exact order, showing how the Antichrist system is actually implemented into the world, and I'm gonna make these parallels. So this is how the boys' finale mirrors the exact sequence of end times events I'll describe. The entire show opens with the world falling apart. Wars, instability, cities burning, people afraid, governments failing, and society fragmenting. This is exactly where the biblical timeline begins in Matthew 24, 6 and 7. The chaos creates the conditions for what comes next. People are scared. They want order. They want a strongman. They want someone to take control and make it stop. Now this is the setup. The problem that requires a solution. The void that needs to be filled in real life. We're living in this phase right now. Regional wars, economic instability, climate chaos, social fragmentation, and political breakdown. The point isn't that these things are falling apart randomly. The point is that chaos creates opportunity for authoritarian power to rise. People will trade their freedom for security when they're scared enough. In The Boys, we see this explicitly. The world is unstable, soups are destroying cities, and people are dying. There's no order, there's no safety. And into that chaos, a figure emerges who promises to fix it, who says he can bring power, who has the power to enforce it. And of course we know that figure is Homelander. So event 1 is the precondition, the soft ground that makes the rise of the Antichrist possible. Without chaos, there's no need for a strongman. Without fear, there's no need for absolute authority. The system needs event 1, and it needs instability. It needs chaos, because chaos is what makes people willing to accept what comes next. As the chaos increases, something happens simultaneously. The church merges with political nationalism. The great falling away occurs. 2 Thessalonians 2 and 3, as we said earlier, understands this point. In The Boys, this is Firecracker. She leads to the merger of Christianity with Homelander worship. She uses Christian language, Christian aesthetics, and Christian symbols to validate the rise of the Antichrist, especially with other figures. But this isn't unique to the show. This is happening in real time as well. Christian nationalism is rising. Evangelical churches are aligning with authoritarian figures. The language of faith is being weaponized to justify political power. The cross is being merged with the flag. The church isn't supposed to oppose this merger according to the prophecy. The church falls away. It stops opposing to the world system and starts serving it. It becomes a spiritual cover for political power. Daniel 11:23 describes the coming of this. The arrangement is between the church and the Antichrist system. The church agrees to legitimize the system, to provide spiritual cover, to use faith as a marketing tool for political power. In exchange, the church gets relevance, funding, influence, and protection. Without an opposing church, there's no moral authority to challenge the rising tyrant. The spiritual opposition gets neutralized. The next event is the seizure of the ultimate symbol of power in the show. It's the White House. Homelander seizes control of the government. The seat at American institutional power becomes his throne. This fulfills Matthew 24 and 15. The holy place isn't a church. The symbolic center of power in our context of the show, it's Washington, D.C. It's the White House, and it's the Oval Office. When the Antichrist seizes the symbol center of power, that's the moment the final phase begins. He doesn't just have power, he has authority. He doesn't just rule, he's made legitimate. He's sitting in the seat of government saying, I am the government. I am the system. There is no power above me. This is different from the first events. This is visible. This is undeniable. And this is the moment when the Antichrist stops hiding behind institutions and becomes the institution itself. In The Boys, Homelander sitting in the Oval Office declaring himself is event 3. The symbolic power center has been taken. The government is his now. There's no separation between political power and the beast system anymore. They are one thing. Revelation 13 and 2 describes this as well. The throne matters, the seat of power matters, because it makes the power legitimate in certain people's eyes. Homelander isn't just strong, he's the president in that context. He's constitutional authority, and he's legal power. Event 3 is when the system becomes official, when the Antichrist takes his throne openly. But before the system could solidify, the old structure had to be removed. The people who remember the way things used to be, the institutional memory, the old power structures that might resist. This is Sister Sage's role. She orchestrates the removal, she clears the obstacles, she does the ritualistic purification that makes way for total consolidation. Daniel 11 and 21 describes this. He doesn't seize it by open force, or at least not yet. He seizes it through intrigue, through manipulation, and through removing people quietly, through consolidating power through bureaucratic means before revealing his hand. Sister Sage represents this phase. She's the one removing Victoria Newman. She's the one clearing the board for Homelander to have absolute, unquestioned control. This is where all the minor characters fall away. The ones who might have resisted. The ones who still had alliance to the old way of doing things. Event 4 is the consolidation phase. It's not yet open terror. It's not yet final persecution. It's the removal of internal objects. The clearing of this board. In real terms, this would be removal of anyone in government who might resist, purges of the military, and replacement of institutional leadership with loyalist, removal of anyone who remembers or represents the old order. By the end of Event 4, there's no internal resistance left. The old structures are gone, and the board is completely clear. Now comes the moment the entire system has been working toward. Homelander stands in the seat of power and declares himself God. This is the moment of revelation. Not the moment of deception, not the moment of hidden power. The moment when the mask comes completely off. When the Antichrist openly declares that there is no God but him. That he is the power. That his will is law and that his word is truth. This is different from the previous events. This is when he stops pretending to be anything other than what he actually is. In The Boys, this is Homelander explicitly saying,
God every night. I am God!
This is the abomination of desolation. This is the signal that everything is about to change, and this is the moment from which there is no return to any previous order. This is the evacuation warning. So we see the moment where those who are paying attention need to leave, need to separate, and need to get out because what comes next is total control. Event 5 is the declaration, the moment when the system is fully revealed, when the Antichrist shows his hand completely with no barriers. By this point, the church has already fallen away, the opposition has already been removed, and the government is his. There's nothing left to stop him. The mark of the beast isn't a literal tattoo, though it could be, who knows. It's total dependence on the system. It's the integration of identity, economic status, and the survival into the beast's infrastructure. In The Boys, this is when soup supremacy becomes the new law, when humans are categorized as subjects, when Vought's technology becomes the requirement for everything. Healthcare, banking, work, education, all of it flows through. The mark of the beast system is about total integration. You can't buy or sell. You can't work. You can't access services. You can't exist in society without the system knowing who you are, what you're doing, where you are, and what you think. And this is what digital currencies, biometric identification, social credit systems, and AI surveillance are building towards. Not necessarily fully yet, but the infrastructure is being built right now in front of your face. Event 6 is when the new system becomes inescapable. When the system is fully implemented and inescapable, the entire population falls in line. They don't just tolerate the beast system, they worship it. They celebrate it. They defend it. Revelation 13 and 8, all inhabitants of earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life. Notice it doesn't say most or many, it says all. The entire population aligns with the system. Not through force alone, though force is part of it, through integration, through making the system so necessary that resistance becomes impossible. In The Boys, we see this play out. The entire country falls in line. People worship Homelander. They accept soup supremacy. They don't recognize they're enslaved because the chains are comfortable. They have shelter, food, safety. What more do they want? And what more do they need? This is the genius of the beast system. It doesn't need to torture people into submission, it just needs to make submission more comfortable than resistance. It just needs to make the system more inevitable. It just needs to make opposition seem impossible. Event 7 is the normalization. This is when people stop asking questions, when they stop thinking of alternatives, when the system becomes inevitable because it becomes total. By this point, there's barely any rebels left, and there's no resistant movements, there's no opposition, there's just the world accepting the new normal. And then the show ends, with no savior returning, with no system being overthrown, no redemption, just a world accepting the new reality after Homelander is dead. This is the most prophetically accurate part of the show because it shows something most people don't want to acknowledge. Without divine intervention, the system has one. Without God returning, there is no escape. There is no savior yet. There is just the eternal present under the beast. The only thing that interrupts the eternal present of the beast is God. Only divine intervention breaks the cycle. Only Christ returning ends the system. Without that, humanity just lives under the beast indefinitely. And the show ends there, in the eternal present, in the world that has accepted the new normal and the system that has become so total, so integrated, so necessary that no one can imagine anything different. This is Event 8, the final state. The world after the beast has consolidated total control and no one has returned to save it. The 8 events are chaos, religious corruption, symbolic power seizure, internal purification, full revelation, system implementation, mass worship, and permanent submission. These aren't speculative. These aren't theoretical. These are the exact events described in Revelation and Daniel, playing out in the boys' finale. And they're being paralleled in our world right now. We're living through these events in real time. We can see which phase we're in, and we can see what's coming next. And without God's intervention, there is no escape. The question the show asks, and the question we have to ask ourselves, is simple. Do we see what's happening? And if you do, what are you going to do about it? Because these events don't stop unless someone stops them, and that someone isn't coming within the system. We need the Messiah.